Water has always carried a voice. Sometimes it roars through canyons, sometimes it trickles softly across mossy stones, but it always speaks. To listen to a river at night is to hear more than the sound of water alone. It is to hear the ancient dialogue between earth and sky, gravity and time, history and imagination. A river does not simply flow, it remembers, it transforms, and it whispers stories we cannot always understand. From the beginning of human memory, rivers have defined the shape of our world. Civilizations were born on their banks. The Nile, the Indus, the Tigris, the Euphrates. They carried commerce, sustained crops, and gave people life. And yet, beneath this familiarity, rivers have always held a second, quieter reputation. They are not merely roads of water, but thresholds, lines between one place and another, one condition and another, one world and another. It is no accident that so many myths speak of rivers that souls must cross when life is finished. To stand by flowing water is to feel both comfort and unease, comfort in its constancy, unease in its suggestion of somewhere beyond. Our story begins with one such river. Unlike most rivers, which find their end in the sea, a delta, or the embrace of another stream, this river is said to vanish. It does not conclude in a way that feels ordinary. According to travelers, poets, villagers, and even a handful of curious scientists, it disappears into a darkness that seems less like a geographical feature and more like a passage. The claim, whispered across centuries, is that this river flows into another world. But what do we mean when we say another world? Some have believed it leads into the underworld of myth, a place where spirits wander. Others suggest a subterranean realm, vast caverns, hidden oceans beneath rock, places untouched by daylight. And there are those who hint at something stranger still, something that defies the language of maps, that the river's waters slip beyond the geography of Earth itself, toward realms of dream or dimension. Whatever the interpretation, the story has persisted, nourished by mystery, as steadily as the river itself is nourished by mountain springs. To understand why this idea endures, we must first slow down and notice the dual nature of rivers. They are familiar, yet unknowable. We can see their surfaces glint in sunlight, but their depths hide secrets. We can measure their length, but not always predict where they vanish beneath limestone, or emerge again far away. In this way, rivers embody the paradox of knowledge itself, what we can hold in our hands, versus what remains forever out of reach. They are threads in the fabric of geography, but also mirrors in which people glimpse other realities. When night falls, and the mind is quieter, such mysteries feel closer. Imagine lying beside a darkened river, its waters moving steadily onward, unseen, but insistent. The sound alone invites reflection. Where does it go? What does it know? The human imagination, unanchored by certainty, begins to follow the current. It is this blend of calm and wonder, of stillness and curiosity, that makes rivers perfect subjects for both mythmakers and dreamers. And so, across cultures, across centuries, the pattern repeats. Rivers become doorways, their journeys, symbolic of journeys, the human heart cannot yet complete. This documentary will follow the course of one particular river, the one most often said to flow into another world. But before we arrive at its banks, we must wander through the larger history of rivers in human thought. We will see how ancient people imagined them, how explorers encountered their vanishing acts, and how local villagers told stories that merged geology with myth. We will linger in the spaces where science attempts explanations and where folklore resists them. And through all of this, we will keep one ear tuned to the murmur of water itself, steady, constant, suggestive of something more. As we drift along this narrative, we will move slowly, like a boat carried by the current, unhurried, reflective. There is no need to rush. The purpose is not to prove or disprove, but to dwell in the threshold where history meets mystery. In that threshold lies the river's true power, It reminds us that the world we know is never the whole of the world that exists. Maps end, facts grow thin, and still the water flows. By the close of this journey, the river will remain what it has always been, both real and elusive. It will not surrender all of its secrets, and perhaps that is the lesson. Some mysteries are not there to be solved, but to be carried, like a current that passes through generations, linking past and present, myth and memory. For now, we begin where all rivers begin, at the edge of the known, listening to the whisper of water as it beckons us forward. When ancient peoples looked at rivers, they did not see only water. They saw a line, a division between one place and another, one life and another, one reality and its shadow. To step onto a riverbank was to approach a boundary. On one side stood the known villages, fields, the warmth of fire and family. On the other side stretched the uncertain foreign lands, wild forests, the mysterious beyond. And within the water itself, flowing ever onward, was a reminder that existence never stands still. Everything crosses, everything changes. It is no wonder then that so many cultures turned rivers into sacred thresholds. They became the places where mortals and spirits touched, where the living could sense the pull of other realms. In myth and legend, the river is not simply a feature of geography, it is a cosmic border, a spiritual gate, a veil between two kinds of existence. In the world of the Greeks, one river towered above all others in imagination, the Styx, winding through the underworld. It was said to separate the realm of the living from the realm of the dead. Souls had to cross its waters, ferried by the grim boatman Charon, before they could reach the shadowy domains of Hades. The Styx was more than a simple river, its waters carried binding oaths. Even the gods themselves swore by it, for to break an oath made upon the Styx meant exile from Olympus. Here the river is both law and passage, both sacred truth and solemn barrier. Far to the east, in the traditions of India, another river appears as a crossing for souls, the Vitarani. It is described in Hindu texts as a river of blood and filth, filled with terrifying creatures, which the soul of the deceased must cross in order to reach the afterlife. Some traditions say that offerings made by the living can help a departed spirit pass safely over its dreadful current. Once again, the river is a threshold, this time a test of spiritual merit, a reminder that crossing into eternity is never easy, never without challenge. The Norse too imagined rivers marking the borders of worlds. In their myths, rivers formed barriers of icy venom, coursing between realms of gods and giants. Some flowed from the primeval wellspring at the root of Yggdrasil, the world tree, reaching into distant lands of fire and frost. To approach these rivers was to brush against the dangerous edges of creation itself. They did not merely flow, they guarded, they divided, they kept the living from stumbling into places not meant for mortal feet. Even in the Americas, where landscapes differed, the theme remained. Among the Maya, rivers and caves, often merged in myth, Ixabulba, the fearsome underworld, was said to be accessible through watery passages beneath the earth. Rivers here were not simply above ground, but pathways downward into unseen realms. Rituals of descent often began at cave rivers, where priests would enter darkness by water, enacting journeys of death and rebirth. The boundary was both physical and symbolic. Water carried the traveler into other dimensions of existence. From culture to culture, the message repeats: rivers were not only resources of life, but lines of demarcation. They were the natural world's way of teaching humans about limits and crossings. The current could be a gift, watering fields, offering fish, easing travel, yet it could also be a warning. Once you step into this flow, you may not come back the same. The duality of rivers is striking. On the one hand, they are providers, they bring fertility, sustenance, and trade. The Nile's annual flooding gave Egypt its soil, turning desert into breadbasket. The Indus carried the seeds of one of humanity's earliest civilizations. Without rivers, many cultures would not have risen at all. Yet, on the other hand, rivers were feared, floods destroyed villages, depths drowned the unwary. their hidden channels led where no map could follow. The river was thus always two things at once, a lifeline and a reminder of mortality, and so mythology reflected this truth. Each river of legend was both beautiful and dangerous, both bridge and barrier. In story after story, a hero or a soul must cross a river, but rarely without cost, payment to a ferryman, bravery in the face of monsters, the guidance of ritual. Something was always required. Crossing the boundary was never free, for boundaries exist to teach us reverence. If we listen closely, we notice that these myths are less about geography and more about human longing. They reveal a deep awareness of transition, the knowledge that life itself is a passage. Just as a river never stands still, so our lives never remain fixed. Childhood becomes adulthood, health becomes frailty, life becomes death. Every human being senses the flow, and every culture, in its own way, has placed a river at the heart of that intuition. The river is change made visible, it is transformation we can hear and see. This explains why rivers so easily became linked with other worlds. They already mark the boundary between earth and water, between shore and current. It was natural to imagine that they might also mark the boundary between here and beyond. The symbolism is seamless, stepping onto a boat, leaving behind solid ground, being carried away to a place we cannot reach by foot. Death itself felt like such a crossing, and so rivers became the imagery of passage. At night when the mind is quiet, these ancient stories gain new resonance. To imagine the Styx, the Vaitarani, the icy rivers of Norse myth, or the dark waters leading to Sebulba, is to feel a chill that is both eerie and strangely comforting. These rivers tell us, yes, there is a line between this world and the next, but the line is not a wall, it is a flow. Life does not end abruptly, it passes like water into another form, another course. And here we return to the mysterious river of our own story. The claim that a river in our world flows into another realm is not an isolated fantasy. It rests upon a vast background of human imagination, in which rivers have always been thresholds. When people whisper that this river does not end in any sea, but in another world, they are echoing voices as old as civilization. They are carrying forward the same intuition that guided Greeks, Hindus, Norsemen, and Maya, that water is more than water, and a river is more than geography. In this way, the river's mystery feels less strange and more inevitable. Given humanity's long history of seeing rivers as portals, is it any wonder that one river somewhere might earn such a reputation? Myth and geography here are not opposed, they meet and merge, just as water merges with water. The next step in our journey will bring us closer to history itself, the recorded accounts of rivers that vanish, disappear, or flow into darkness. Some of these cases are natural, others baffling, but all of them set the stage for the river at the heart of our tale. History is filled with accounts of rivers that do not behave as we expect. Most rivers follow a familiar pattern, a source in the highlands, a widening flow through valleys, and finally, a release into larger waters, the sea, a lake, or the embrace of another river. Yet scattered across ancient writings are stories of rivers that resist this order, rivers that vanish into the earth, only to reappear elsewhere, or never again. To the people who witnessed such disappearances, these waters seemed uncanny. They were not merely geographical features, but puzzles, enigmas inscribed upon the land. The earliest geographers of the Mediterranean world often recorded such marvels. Herodotus, the so-called father of history, wrote of strange rivers during his travels. He described waters in Libya that sank into the sand, lost without a trace. Strabo, centuries later, added to this catalogue, noting places where streams vanished into caverns or were swallowed by the earth itself. For these thinkers, rivers that disappeared were both natural curiosities and hints of hidden worlds. If water could vanish into unseen channels, what else might be concealed beneath the surface of the earth? The Romans, too, recorded rivers of mystery. Pliny the Elder, in his Natural History, described rivers that emerged hot in some seasons and cold in others, streams that turned objects to stone, and others that seemed to flow underground for vast distances. He wrote of the Alpheus River in Greece, said to dive beneath the sea and reappear in Sicily. According to legend, objects thrown into the Alpheus in Olympia were later found in the fountain of Arethusa, across the sea. Was this poetic fancy, or an observation of real subterranean hydrology? For Pliny's readers, the line between science and myth was thin, and the river's vanishing act fed both wonder and belief. In China too, there are records of rivers that defy expectation. Ancient chronicles speak of streams that sink into limestone mountains, only to return elsewhere, sometimes miles away. The hidden rivers of karst landscapes fascinated scholars, who described them in terms both practical and mystical. Some texts claimed these waters carried messages to the underworld, while others treated them as evidence of a living earth, an organism whose veins were rivers. The Middle East, cradle of so many civilizations, also carried tales of vanishing waters. In the deserts of Arabia, travelers wrote of wadis, seasonal rivers that appear with rain and then vanish, swallowed by sand and heat. Though modern science explains these as temporary flows, ancient observers saw them as tricksters, rivers that came and went as they pleased, like spirits visiting and departing without farewell. Some believed such rivers led into the unseen realms beneath the dunes, perhaps joining underground seas that sustained oases far away. Europe, rich in caves and karst landscapes, produced some of the most famous examples of disappearing rivers. In Slovenia, the Ljubljanica River flows above ground, then vanishes into caverns, only to emerge again in another valley. Ancient peoples who lived there must have regarded this with awe, a river that died and was reborn. Roman settlers named it the River of Seven Names, acknowledging the way it seemed to transform as it passed through the land. Each disappearance gave it a new identity, a new face, yet it was always the same river beneath. Medieval travelers added their own accounts, often embroidered with wonder. Pilgrims journeying across Europe told of rivers that vanished into caves they dared not enter, or of springs that appeared mysteriously, their sources unknown. Some chroniclers connected these waters to local saints or spirits, suggesting divine hands guided their flow. In such tales, the river's disappearance was not a geological event but a miracle, a sign that the sacred touched the earth. Even in the Americas, explorers wrote of strange waterways. Early Spanish travelers in Mexico and Central America noted rivers that slipped into sinkholes, the famous cenotes of the Yucatan. To the Maya, these were entrances to the underworld, places where offerings were cast into depths that seemed bottomless. The Spaniards, blending awe with fear, recorded these phenomena as both marvels of nature and doors to a terrifying beyond. What unites all these accounts, Greek, Roman, Chinese, Arabian, European, American, is a sense of disquiet. A river that follows its course is a comfort. We can trace its path, predict its future, depend upon its return, but a river that vanishes unsettles us. It breaks the expected pattern. It invites questions. Where has it gone? What lies beneath? Such questions, unanswered, open the door to myth. The people of the past often responded by layering explanation upon explanation. Sometimes the answer was practical. The river flows underground, or its water evaporates in the desert. Sometimes the answer was spiritual. The river descends into the realm of gods, spirits, or the dead. And often the truth was allowed to remain ambiguous, half scientific, half sacred. This ambiguity gave the river its enduring power. A puzzle half solved is more captivating than one fully explained. It is within this tradition of vanishing waters that our mysterious river belongs. When locals claim it flows into another world, they are not inventing a new idea, but echoing a very old one. Across centuries, across continents, people have stood at the edge of rivers that disappear and have felt the same wonder, the same unease. The phenomenon is ancient, and so too is the interpretation. Disappearance means passage, absence means crossing, water means boundary. In the next stage of our journey, we will leave behind these scattered accounts and step directly to the river at the center of our story. Its course, its vanishing, and its reputation as a passage into another world are rooted in both geography and legend. Like the Alpheus, like the Ljubljanica, like the rivers of desert and cave, it invites us to follow where the water goes, even if that means venturing beyond the map. Every mystery has a heart, a place where speculation gathers like mist on the water. For centuries, stories of vanishing rivers have circled the world, but among them, one river has drawn more whispers than most. It is not the longest, nor the widest, nor the most famous. Yet in its quiet persistence, it has become a symbol of thresholds, of boundaries half seen. This is the river said not to end in ocean or lake, but to flow onward, downward, elsewhere, into another world. Let us walk slowly toward it. Imagine a landscape of rugged hills, where limestone ridges rise like ancient bones from the earth. Small villages cling to the valleys, their houses pale against the greenery, their rooftops weathered by centuries of rain. The river begins high in the mountains, its source a spring as clear as glass. Locals say its waters are so pure that a coin dropped into its shallows can be seen glittering on the stones below. It begins gently, winding through meadows where cattle graze, where children have for generations played along its edges. But as the river travels, its character changes, the banks grow steeper. Rock replaces meadow, the current strengthens, tugging insistently at anything in its way. By the time it reaches the middle of its course, the river no longer feels like a friendly companion. It feels purposeful, urgent, as though it knows something its travelers do not. Here the villages fall away. Few houses are built close to the banks. Perhaps it is fear of floods, or perhaps it is something older, a wariness born from memory and story. The landscape narrows into a gorge, its walls streaked with moisture, its shadows cool even in summer. The river roars louder here, echoing against stone, and then quite suddenly, it disappears. The water does not spread into a delta, nor does it pour into a visible lake. It plunges into a cavernous opening in the earth, swallowed whole by the limestone. One moment a torrent, the next a vanishing act. Standing at the mouth of this cavern, travelers have long felt unease. The sound of water continues within, but it grows faint, muffled, lost in darkness. The cave's entrance yawns like a gate, its ceiling dripping with stalactites, its floor scattered with boulders. No one can see where the river goes. Lamps reveal only a short passage before the blackness swallows everything. Local guides warn that venturing too far is dangerous. The rocks are slippery, the tunnels unstable, the current strong enough to drag a person away. For centuries, villagers have told stories to explain this disappearance. Some say the river emerges again many miles away, feeding distant springs whose sources are unknown. Others insist that no one has ever truly traced its journey, that once the river passes into darkness, it is gone forever. And here the whispers begin. If it does not emerge, then perhaps it does not remain in our world at all. Perhaps the cavern is not merely geological, but metaphysical, a passage through stone and shadow into a place no map can chart. Travelers have recorded their impressions for generations. An Ottoman geographer, in the 16th century, described the river as a messenger to unseen realms, noting the way locals refused to fish near its mouth. A 19th-century European explorer, fascinated by karst landscapes, wrote of trying to follow the sound of water into the cave, only to be driven back by fear of collapse. It was, he confessed, as though the earth itself was swallowing the river whole, digesting it into mystery. To the villagers, the river is both blessing and burden. Its upper course waters their fields, feeds their animals, and sustains their households. But near its disappearance, they keep their distance. Few draw water there, and fewer still cross the gorge at night. Some claim to hear voices mingled with the rush of the current, whispers in languages unknown, fragments of laughter or lamentation. Children are warned not to wander too close, lest the river's pull prove stronger than their own footing. Archaeological surveys in the region have uncovered traces of ancient activity near the cavern. Shards of pottery, fragments of ritual objects, and the remnants of fires suggest that people once gathered here with intention. Some archaeologists believe these were offerings left to appease the river's spirit. Others argue the site was a meeting place for early ritual, a kind of threshold sanctuary where water and stone symbolized the passage between worlds. The evidence, incomplete and ambiguous, leaves the question open. Were these artifacts the remains of worship, or simply of habitation? As with so much about the river, clarity dissolves as soon as we approach. What makes this river so compelling is the way it combines the natural and the supernatural so seamlessly. Geologists can explain how water in limestone regions often disappears underground, following channels carved by centuries of erosion. Yet even geologists admit that tracing such rivers is difficult. Tunnels collapse, passages narrow, and currents carry water into labyrinths too tight for exploration. Instruments may map parts of the system, but there always remains uncertainty. Into that uncertainty flows imagination, filling the gaps with story. Thus the river becomes both real and symbolic. It is a fact of geography, flowing, disappearing, perhaps re-emerging in hidden springs, and it is also a myth of passage, a reminder of thresholds. The two identities coexist as inseparable as the banks of a stream. One does not cancel the other. Instead, each enriches the sense of wonder the river inspires. For those who live far from it, hearing the story for the first time, the river becomes a dreamscape. We picture the water plunging into darkness, endless caverns beneath the earth, a current flowing unseen, perhaps forever. For those who live near it, the river is part of daily life, yet always tinged with reverence. To them it is not merely water, but a presence. It humbles, it warns, it reminds. As we linger at the mouth of the cavern, the question grows louder in the mind: where does the river go? Some say it emerges far away, some say it ends in nothingness, others still believe it carries its waters to another world. The uncertainty is the very essence of the mystery. In a world where so much has been mapped, named and measured, here is a flow that resists certainty. Here is a place where the line between fact and myth dissolves like ripples on the surface of water, and so our journey pauses here, on the threshold. We have walked from the spring in the mountains to the cavern in the gorge. We have seen how the river nourishes, how it vanishes, how it inspires awe and caution alike. Ahead lies darkness, both literal and symbolic. To follow the river further, we must listen not only to science, but to the voices of those who live along its banks, for they have preserved the oldest and most intimate tales of what happens when the river disappears. If rivers are lifelines, they are also storytellers. Wherever water flows, stories follow. For the people who live along the banks of the mysterious river, the one that disappears into the earth, legends have grown like reeds in the shallows, nourished by centuries of whispers. These tales are not written in stone or ink. They are carried in voices, passed from grandparents to children, from evening firesides to quiet riverside walks. To hear them is to enter another layer of the river's reality, a realm where myth and memory blend so closely that one can no longer tell where fact ends and imagination begins. The first legend is the simplest and perhaps the oldest. Villagers say the river is not merely water, but a being. It is alive, aware, listening. They speak of it as the one who remembers. According to this tale, the river carries the memories of all who have stood beside it. Every word spoken near its banks, every sorrow confessed to its current, every joy shouted across its meadows, all of it is borne away, flowing into the cavern. There in the hidden depths, the river keeps these memories safe. Some say that if one listens closely on a moonless night, when the gorge is silent except for water, the river will repeat fragments of those memories, whispering them back like echoes of the past. Another tale is darker. It warns of the lost ones. These are people who vanish near the river, never to return. Some were said to be careless children who strayed too close to the gorge, others hunters who followed game into the forest, others still travelers passing through. The story says the river claims them, pulling them into its unseen world, yet unlike a normal drowning, their bodies are never found downstream. Instead, it is said, they continue walking somewhere else. In dreams, villagers have claimed to see them moving through strange landscapes of twilight, carrying with them the clothes, the tools, even the expressions they wore when they vanished. Whether these dreams are visions or imagination, no one can say, but the sense remains to be taken by the river is not to end, but to continue elsewhere. There is also a gentler legend, one that comforts rather than frightens. It tells of the Silver Bridge. According to this story, once every generation, the river opens a path for those who are pure of heart. On a certain night, no one agrees on which, the water at the cavern's mouth glows faintly, like moonlight on metal. For a brief moment, it hardens, becoming a bridge of silver. Those who step upon it are carried not downward, but across into another world of peace and light. Some say this is the realm of ancestors, others call it the garden of spirits. Either way, the legend is told to children, not as a warning, but as a reminder. The river is not only an end, but also a promise. Seasonal rhythms have also inspired stories. During heavy rains, when the river swells and its current roars louder, villagers claim that the voices from the cavern grow more intense. People say they have heard laughter carried on the spray, or music like flutes and drums echoing from deep within. The elders interpret this as the river's festival, a celebration in the world beyond. When storms pass and the waters recede, the gorge falls silent again, as if the celebration has ended. The doors closed until the next flood. One particularly striking tale concerns the river's bride. Long ago, villagers say there lived a young woman who disappeared near the gorge. The searchers found no trace of her except for a garland of flowers floating where the current vanished into the earth. That night, the river was said to have spoken in a human voice, declaring that it had taken her as a bride. Since then, stories claim she appears on misty mornings, a figure in white drifting along the riverbank, her veil trailing in the water. Some believe she is a guardian, watching over children who stray too near. Others whisper that she waits for companions, hoping to lead them into her hidden world beneath the stone. Even everyday life is colored by such beliefs. Farmers, pouring water from the river onto their fields, sometimes pause to offer a drop back into its flow, a gesture of respect. Fishermen avoid casting nets near the gorge, fearing that whatever they catch there will not belong to this world. Travelers passing through are often warned not to speak ill of the river, for it is said to listen and to remember slights. Weddings too have traditions tied to the current. In some villages, brides toss flowers into the water, hoping the river will carry blessings to their union, rather than jealous whispers from its depths. These legends serve more than entertainment, they shape behavior, weaving reverence into daily routine. In this way, the river governs not just the land, but the people's imagination. It becomes a moral teacher, rewarding respect, punishing arrogance, guiding choices. One can almost hear the older villagers saying, "The river knows." What makes these tales so powerful is their ambiguity. None can be proven, none can be disproven. The cavern swallows not only water, but certainty. The echoes of rushing current leave space for other echoes, the echoes of story, and in these echoes, communities have preserved a sense of awe, a reminder that life is lived at the edge of mystery. To outsiders, these stories may seem like folklore, charming, but fanciful. Yet to the villagers, they are lived truths. They remind people to tread carefully, to honor forces larger than themselves, to accept that not everything can be explained. Whether the river truly carries the dead, or memories, or brides is less important than the reverence such stories inspire. And still the question lingers, where does the river go? Do the voices belong to echoes, or to spirits? Are the vanishing ones truly lost, or walking in another realm? Legends give answers, but the answers multiply, rather than resolve. Each tale is a doorway, leading deeper into mystery. As our journey continues, we will leave behind the voices of villagers and turn to another group who sought explanations, the early investigators, explorers, and scientists who came to the river with instruments and theories. They hoped to silence the legends with facts, yet they too found themselves drawn into uncertainty. Their stories, like those of the locals, leave us standing on the banks, gazing into the cavern, wondering what flows beyond. When legends linger too long, they often call to another kind of seeker, the investigator. Where villagers see omens and whispers, explorers and scientists see puzzles waiting to be solved. So it was with this river. By the 19th century, when maps were being redrawn and natural wonders catalogued, rumors of a river that vanished underground began to attract attention far beyond its quiet valley. Men of learning, armed with journals, lanterns, and measuring tools, came to test whether myth could be weighed, traced, and explained. The earliest records of such curiosity are fragmentary. A traveling naturalist, passing through in the early 1800s, scribbled a brief note in his diary. The water runs with great vigor, and then most unnaturally disappears beneath a stone moor. No outflow is observable nearby. Local people declare it leads to another world. I suspect fissures or subterranean channels. He offered no map, no measurements, but the observation was enough to spark interest. The simple phrase, subterranean channels, gave the story a new frame. What had been a myth became a scientific anomaly, a feature to be studied rather than feared. As the century progressed, more formal expeditions arrived. Some were financed by academies, eager to expand knowledge of geology. Others were led by curious adventurers, who saw the river as a mystery fit for personal glory. They brought ropes, compasses, rudimentary diving equipment, and in later years, even early forms of waterproof lanterns. Their goal was simple: to trace the water's path underground, to find where it emerged, and to map what lay hidden between disappearance and reappearance. The methods were ingenious, if imperfect. One common experiment involved tossing colored dyes into the current at the cavern's mouth. If the same color appeared downstream in another river or spring, investigators reasoned they could trace the underground connection. Reports tell of crimson dye vanishing into the gorge and reappearing days later in a well many kilometers away. Other experiments used floating objects, carved wood, sealed bottles, even specially marked gourds. Some of these never reappeared, vanishing forever into the Earth's labyrinth. Others were found miles away, suggesting a vast and complex network beneath the valley. Yet, despite these clever trials, clarity never came. Timelines varied. Sometimes the dye appeared quickly, sometimes not at all. Objects vanished or turned up in places no one expected. The underground world was too tangled, too inaccessible for easy mapping. Each attempt revealed a fragment, but left larger questions untouched. More daring explorers attempted physical descent. Ropes were lowered into the cavern, lanterns tied securely, and men climbed down in cautious steps. Accounts describe narrow passages, slippery rock, and the constant thunder of water echoing in darkness. Some reached chambers, where the river roared past in violent torrents, impossible to cross. Others found side tunnels, leading nowhere or ending in sheer drops. None managed to follow the water for more than a short distance. The river resisted intrusion, its path guarded by stone and shadow. One mid-19th century explorer wrote of a peculiar sensation while inside the cavern. The air grew heavy, and sounds seemed distorted, as though the river's voice were not merely echo, but language. My companions laughed at my fancy, but I could not shake the impression that the water itself was aware of our trespass. Such remarks blurred the line between science and legend, suggesting that even men of reason were not immune to the atmosphere of mystery. By the early 20th century, technology had improved. Tracers, chemical tests, and surveying equipment offered more precision. Still, results remained inconsistent. A team of hydrologists in the 1920s declared with confidence that the river re-emerged more than 20 kilometers away, its waters feeding a larger system downstream. Yet other teams, repeating the same tests, found different results. The river seemed unwilling to submit to a single explanation, its hidden pathways shifting like a riddle that changes each time it is asked. Curiously, the more scientists studied the phenomenon, the more respect they gained for the village's traditions. Many noted the way locals avoided disturbing the gorge or left small offerings at its edge. What once seemed superstition began to appear as caution, born of generations of experience. Even modern investigators admitted that there was wisdom in reverence. To dismiss the legends entirely was to miss the deeper truth. The river held power, whether measured in cubic meters or in whispered tales. It is important to note that scientific curiosity never entirely erased the sense of awe. Reports, even in technical journals, often carried a tone of wonder. Geologists described the rock formations as cathedral-like, with vaults of stone arching overhead, as though nature itself had built temples around the river's secret course. Hydrologists admitted that their instruments could only offer partial answers, that much of the subterranean system remained hidden. Again and again, we find a pattern, fact illuminating fragments of mystery, but never extinguishing it. And so early investigations left us with more questions than answers. We know the river flows underground, yet we do not know every twist and chamber of its path. We know its waters reappear, but not always in the same way. We know instruments can measure, yet the measurements shift like shadows. In the end, the scientists, like the villagers, were forced to stand at the edge and admit there is more here than we can fully grasp. Perhaps that is why the river's story continues to captivate. It satisfies both sides of the human mind, the side that longs for reason and the side that hungers for mystery. The scientist and the storyteller, though they speak different languages, both kneel at the same water's edge, listening. As we move forward, the narrative shifts once more. Having heard the voices of villagers and the efforts of investigators, we now turn to those who believed the river was not merely a physical puzzle but a spiritual threshold. In the next section, we will explore how mystics, shamans, and spiritual travelers interpreted the underground flow not as a geological curiosity but as a bridge between worlds. For some, the vanishing river was not simply a riddle of stone and water. It was a threshold, where scientists saw fissures and currents, mystics saw gateways, portals, where one reality blurred into another. The flow that disappeared underground seemed to invite the imagination to follow it, to ask, where does the water truly go? Into another cavern, or into another world? Such questions have always stirred the human spirit. Across cultures, rivers are rarely just rivers. They are metaphors for life, conduits between realms, borders between the living and the dead. It was no different here. The people who lived closest to the gorge developed beliefs that the river was a path souls could take after death. Some whispered that those who died near its banks did not wander lost, but were carried along its current, borne gently into the unseen. Shamans and spiritual travelers spoke of listening to the river's voice during trance states. They described visions of luminous corridors beneath the earth, chambers where light did not come from fire or sun, but from the water itself. In these visions, the current was not destructive but guiding, as if the river knew the way, and the traveler need only surrender. One elder healer, recorded by an anthropologist in the early 1900s, claimed, "When I follow the sound, my spirit drifts with the water. It shows me places not of this valley, cities of silence, mountains that glow. Then it returns me, as if to remind me, not yet." There are echoes here of broader traditions. In Greek mythology, the river Styx was the passage into Hades. In Norse legend, Gel ran close to the underworld, crossed by a golden bridge. In Hindu cosmology, rivers like the Ganges are not only sacred but believed to carry spiritual power, washing the soul toward liberation. It is striking how often cultures far apart arrive at similar metaphors, a river as threshold, as border, as guide into realms beyond human reach. The villagers' beliefs fit seamlessly into this tapestry. To them, the vanishing river was more than water, it was an opening. They warned that to fall into it was to vanish forever, not drowned, but transported. Some stories told of hunters or wanderers who strayed too near, slipped, and were never seen again. Their absence was not tragedy alone, but transformation. They had crossed into the other side, where ancestors dwelled, offerings left at the cavern, flowers, grain, sometimes even coins, were not bribes to a god, but provisions for travelers on their unseen journey. Mystics treated the gorge as a place of vision. At certain times of year, particularly when the moon was full and the water levels swelled, they would gather to perform quiet rituals. Torches were extinguished, chants rose low and steady, and the group would sit in silence, listening to the thunder of the river below. Many reported altered states, as though the sound itself dissolved ordinary boundaries of thought. To modern ears, it may sound like suggestion or group psychology, yet for them, the experience was profound. The river was not only a path for souls, but a teacher for the living, reminding them of impermanence, of journeys greater than their own. Interestingly, travelers and outsiders often sensed something similar. Diaries from early visitors describe a pull when standing near the cavern's mouth, as though the current reached out invisibly. One 19th century spiritualist from France claimed that he dreamt vividly of the river before he ever saw it in person. In his writings, he described the underground passage as a corridor between times, where one could step not only into another world, but into another era. Dreams, visions, echoes, all layered themselves upon the already mysterious landscape. Skeptics, of course, dismissed such accounts as imagination. They argued that darkness, echoing sound, and the fear of falling naturally inspired visions of the otherworldly. And yet, even skeptics admitted that the gorge possessed a rare atmosphere. The scientist who measured rocks by day sometimes confessed to dreaming of endless water by night. The balance between belief and doubt was never clear-cut. The place itself seemed to invite both. There is also the theme of guidance. In many stories, the river was not a threat, but a companion. People prayed to it before long journeys, asking it to show the hidden way. Children were told to respect its waters, for it remembered everything dropped into its depths. In this view, the underground flow was not a place of punishment, but of transformation, carrying burdens away, and returning wisdom in its own rhythm. This notion found resonance in art and song. Folk chants survived, sung in low voices at dusk, speaking of the silver road beneath the hills and waters that carry no shadow. Simple melodies, half lullaby, half prayer, wrapped around the belief that to dream of the river was to glimpse one's own journey after death. When such songs were recorded in the early 20th century, collectors were struck by their calmness. Unlike darker myths of violent underworlds, these chants suggested peace, even reassurance. Spiritual travelers from abroad often came seeking such calm. By the mid-20th century, writers interested in mysticism began to compare the river with sacred sites worldwide: stone circles, hidden caves, desert shrines. Each seemed to hold a threshold quality, places where the veil between worlds thinned. To sit by the vanishing river was, they believed, to sit at a hinge in reality, where silence and sound intertwined. And still, a paradox remains. If the river is a threshold, why does it remain so elusive? If it leads to another world, why does no one return to tell the full tale? Here the contrast sharpens: faith against doubt, vision against evidence. The villagers continued their rituals, the mystics their meditations, while outsiders debated geology and hydrology. Between them flowed the same current, ignoring their arguments, vanishing with calm persistence into the earth. It is this tension, the river as both spiritual guide and physical riddle, that keeps its mystery alive. Were it proven entirely to be a mere geological sinkhole, its power might fade. Were it only legend, it might be dismissed. But existing in both worlds at once, half understood and half untouchable, it compels belief and disbelief alike. As we leave the mystics at their vigil, listening to the underground hymn, we step toward another chapter of the river's story. For belief alone was never enough to contain its mystery. Just as shamans listened to its voice, so too did entire communities gather their folklore into structured myth, weaving tales of gods, heroes and vanished travelers. These myths, passed from generation to generation, gave the river not only meaning, but a kind of immortality. In our next section, we explore these myths in detail, where they came from, how they evolved, and why they continue to shape the river's reputation even today. As with many mysterious landscapes, the river, that vanishes into stone, soon became the heart of stories. Belief alone was powerful, but myth gave it body and voice. Around its echoing cavern, villagers and wanderers spun tales of people who strayed too close, slipped into the water, and were never seen again. Yet, in the rhythm of these stories, their disappearance was never the end. It was always a beginning, a crossing into hidden worlds below. One of the oldest legends tells of a shepherd who followed a stray goat down into the gorge. When the animal slipped and tumbled into the rushing current, the shepherd leapt after it. Neither returned. Days later, villagers claimed to see the shepherd's figure in their dreams, walking along a shining river beneath mountains of crystal. In his hands, they said, he carried not a staff but a branch of silver leaves, something not of this earth. Such details gave the story an air of both sorrow and wonder, suggesting that the river was not a thief but a doorway. Another tale speaks of a traveling merchant who tried to measure the river's flow by throwing carved wooden markers into its mouth. None resurfaced downstream. Years later, a child playing near the gorge found one of the carvings washed ashore, a tiny boat etched with patterns unknown in the village. To the people, this was proof that the merchant had not drowned but had sailed into another kingdom, and that the waters occasionally returned tokens from that hidden place, reminders of journeys still continuing elsewhere. These legends multiplied. Some spoke of entire hunting parties who vanished during storms, their cries drowned by thunder and rushing water, their bodies never recovered. In time, whispers claimed that these hunters now lived in a kingdom beneath, serving a king whose palace was carved from luminous stone. Stories described feasts where the lost sat together, never aging, never returning, but forever gathered in a hall lit by reflections of water on its ceiling. The river, in this sense, was not cruel, it was selective, choosing certain souls to join an unseen fellowship. Children grew up with warnings disguised as stories: do not lean too far. Parents would whisper, for the river may be looking for another guest. Yet, behind the warning, there was fascination. Some children dared each other to throw flowers, believing that if the blooms vanished quickly, the river was hungering for company. When no flower ever returned, it confirmed what they already half believed, that the water led somewhere beyond reach. Visitors from neighboring valleys recorded similar tales. In one village's version, the river did not lead to a single kingdom but to many branching worlds, each with its own laws of time. To fall into one passage was to enter a realm where years passed like hours. To fall into another was to find oneself in a land where one day stretched into centuries. This explained, they said, why some who vanished might return, changed, older or younger than when they left. A few travelers' stories of waking on faraway riverbanks after being swept away lent a fragile strand of evidence to these beliefs. A recurring motif in these tales is the figure of the guardian. Some legends describe a spirit that dwells at the mouth of the cavern, a woman draped in flowing garments, half shadow, half water, who decides who may cross. Others imagine a black dog, eyes like coals, standing silently at the edge, vanishing when approached. These guardians embody the river's dual nature, protective yet perilous, inviting yet forbidding. Whether seen or dreamed, they reinforced the idea that no crossing was accidental, the river chose who to take. One particularly vivid myth describes a hidden kingdom where music never ceases. The lost travelers there are not prisoners, but participants in an eternal song, their voices blending with the current itself. The river's roar, to those listening above, was believed to be the faint echo of this otherworldly choir. Some storytellers claimed that if one sat in silence long enough, patterns in the sound emerged, harmonies rising and falling, a reminder that those below still lived, still sang. Comparisons with distant myths arise naturally. The motif of lost travelers is echoed in Celtic stories of people drawn into fairy mounds, never to emerge unchanged. In Japanese folklore, rivers and waterfalls often conceal hidden kingdoms where mortals might wander, entering a world of spirits and returning with stories too strange to believe. Such parallels suggest that humanity has long projected its deepest mysteries onto landscapes where water vanishes from sight. The unknown course of the river becomes the perfect canvas for imagining other realms. For the people living near the gorge, these stories were not abstract. They guided rituals, warned the reckless, and gave meaning to grief. When someone went missing near the river, families sometimes chose to interpret the loss not as death, but as transformation. Offerings placed by the water were both mourning and hope, mourning for the absence, hope that the traveler had found a place among the hidden halls beneath. This softened sorrow, allowing the unbearable to be woven into a tale of destiny. In the modern era, anthropologists recorded these myths with fascination. They noted how consistently they framed the river not as an enemy, but as a guide. The unknown was softened by imagination, reshaped into kingdoms of light, music, and gathering. Even in darker versions, where the river was described as jealous or demanding, the end was still a passage, a relocation rather than annihilation. For people whose lives were bound to the cycles of nature, the idea that nothing ever truly ended but only transformed was both comforting and powerful. And so, the legends of lost travelers endure. They survive in fragments of song, in cautionary tales told by elders, in the hushed awe of visitors who stand by the roaring mouth of the gorge. Whether literal or symbolic, they remind us of how human imagination meets mystery, by filling absence with story, silence with song, darkness with kingdoms of light. As we listen to these legends, one question arises naturally: how did such tales begin, and why did they persist across generations? To answer, we must look deeper, not just at stories themselves, but at the broader mythological framework in which they are woven. Rivers worldwide carry myths of gods, guardians, and hidden realms. The vanishing river is one among many, yet uniquely its own. In our next section, we step into this wider landscape, comparing myths of underworld rivers across cultures and tracing how a single current of imagination flows through human history. When people stand before a river that disappears, they are confronted with an unsettling truth. The water goes somewhere, but no one can follow it. That gap between what is seen and what is unseen becomes fertile ground for myth. To the villagers who whispered of lost travelers and hidden kingdoms, their river was unique. Yet when we widen our gaze, we discover that across the world, other cultures have told remarkably similar stories. Time and distance dissolve as we notice a shared human instinct to cast rivers as bridges between life and something beyond. Perhaps the most famous example lies in ancient Greece. There the river Styx wound its way through the underworld, a boundary no mortal could cross unaided. Souls of the dead required Charon, the ferryman, to guide them across in his creaking boat. Payment was essential, a coin placed in the mouth of the departed before burial. Without it, the soul wandered endlessly on the near shore. In this vision, the river was not merely a flow of water, but the ultimate threshold dividing the world of breath from the silent halls below. Other rivers also wove through Greek myth. The Lethe, whose name meant forgetfulness, offered its waters to the dead, erasing their earthly memories so they might rest. The Phlegethon, a river of fire, blazed through the underworld with unquenchable flames. Each stream carried a symbolic role, and together they painted a map of the unseen. The Greek imagination revealed a truth that echoes in many places: rivers are more than geography. They are symbols of passage, purification, danger, and transformation. Far to the east, Hindu cosmology speaks of the sacred river Vaitarani, flowing between the realm of the living and Yama's domain of the dead. Crossing it was not easy. The virtuous were aided by their good deeds, which became a bridge. The sinful, however, faced a stream filled with blood and filth, struggling across while tormented by creatures of nightmare. Yet even here, the river is not simply punishment, it is a test, a place of reckoning, a liminal zone where the soul's true nature is revealed. In Norse tradition too, rivers guard thresholds. The mythic river Gull runs close to the gates of Hell, the land of the dead. Over it stretches the Gull Brew, the echoing bridge, guarded by a maiden with shining armor. Travelers describe her as solemn yet fair, echoing the archetype of the river guardian seen in legends worldwide. Crossing Gull was unavoidable, but whether it led to eternal rest or to shadowed halls depended on one's destiny. Once again, water marks the border where mortal power falters, and only fate carries one across. The Celts, whose lands were rich with rivers, lakes and bogs, also spoke of waters as gateways. Many of their myths describe rivers that serve as entrances to the otherworld, a place of eternal youth, feasting, and music. In Irish legend, the Boyne River was associated with the goddess Boyan, whose power linked the flow of water to wisdom and inspiration. Heroes like Oisin were said to travel across seas or rivers to reach Tir na Nog, the land of youth. For the Celts, water was both boundary and invitation, both peril and promise. Across the ocean, in Mesoamerican traditions, rivers also carried the dead. The Aztecs described the soul's journey through Mictlan, the underworld. One of its earliest challenges was crossing the Apanahuaya River. To do so, the dead needed the help of a spirit dogon, an animal companion buried with them in life. Without such aid, the soul would wander endlessly along the riverbank, unable to reach its destination. Once more, we see the pattern: a river as barrier, a helper as guide, and crossing as the essential step in transformation. Chinese mythology tells of the Yellow Springs, where souls encounter the Wanjian River. At its banks stands Mengpo, the Lady of Forgetfulness, who offers a bowl of soup that erases memory. Only after drinking can the soul reincarnate, freed from the weight of past lives. The river itself thus becomes not only a physical crossing, but a psychological one, a flowing veil between identity and renewal. Even in African traditions, rivers occupy a similar role. Among the Yoruba, water deities like Ocean embody fertility, love, and the spiritual flow of destiny. Death itself is often imagined as a journey across a body of water, a passage not to an end, but to another mode of being. In this view, the current that carries the soul onward is not cruel, but necessary, as natural as the return of rain to the sea. The recurrence of these myths raises questions. Why do rivers so often represent passage into other worlds? One reason may lie in their physical nature. Rivers are dynamic, they move, they vanish into the ground, they spill into oceans. Unlike mountains, which are fixed, or forests, which surround, rivers suggest transition. To step into one is to be swept away, powerless to resist. That surrender mirrors the human experience of death, inevitable, ungovernable, and profoundly mysterious. Yet there is another reason. Water is life-giving, but it also conceals. Its depths are opaque, its currents unpredictable. Standing at the edge of a river that disappears underground, the imagination cannot help but ask, where does it go? If no one can follow, then perhaps it flows into another world. From Greece to India, from Mexico to Ireland, this instinct recurs. The river becomes a metaphor for the unseen journey, a narrative bridge between life's certainty and the vast unknown. When we compare these myths, a pattern emerges. Rivers of death are rarely final. They are not walls, but crossings. Even when fearsome, they lead somewhere, an underworld, a paradise, a place of music or memory. Humanity resists the idea of ending. Instead we reframe it as transformation, as a voyage. The river is both terror and comfort. It swallows, but it also delivers. And so, when villagers standing by their own vanishing river whispered of shepherds and merchants entering hidden kingdoms, they were not alone in their imagination. They were part of a chorus of humanity that has, across continents and centuries, turned rivers into symbols of passage. What makes their story unique is not the motif itself, but the intimacy with which they experienced it. Their river was not myth, but presence, a sound in their ears, a shadow in their valley, a mystery flowing just beyond reach. As these parallels echo in our minds, we are left with a realization: myths are not isolated inventions, but reflections of shared human wonder. The vanishing river is both local and universal, both singular and part of a larger tapestry. And yet, if so many cultures imagined rivers as thresholds, what of the people who lived beside this particular one? How did it shape their daily lives, their fears, and their rituals? In our next section, we turn from global myth back to local practice, examining how ancient communities built ceremonies, offerings, and traditions around the flowing mystery at their door. When a river is seen as a gateway to another world, it cannot be treated like ordinary water. It demands reverence, caution, and dialogue. For those who lived beside the vanishing river, rituals arose not from superstition alone, but from necessity. Acts of respect that bridged the visible and the invisible. The river's current was more than a natural force. It was a presence, and to ignore that presence was to risk offense, misfortune, or even disappearance. Across ancient communities, the most common ritual was the offering. Simple at first, offerings might have included handfuls of grain, wildflowers, or drops of milk poured into the water. These gifts were tokens of gratitude, acknowledgments that the river gave life to crops and herds, even as it hinted at hidden realms below. But as generations passed, the rituals grew more elaborate. Animals were sacrificed at the banks, coins were cast into the current, and in some accounts, more precious sacrifices, treasured weapons, crafted ornaments, or even human lives were given over to the deep. The practice of throwing valuables into rivers is found in many cultures. In Celtic lands, weapons, bent and broken, were lowered into watery depths, never to be used again. The purpose was twofold: an act of devotion to deities, believed to dwell in the waters, and a deliberate rendering useless of instruments of war, as though the river itself could cleanse violence. In Scandinavian bogs, entire hoards of gold and silver have been found carefully placed rather than scattered, suggesting ritual intent. To the people of the vanishing river, such acts would have carried a similar weight. To give something to the current was to surrender it beyond reach, to trust that it would arrive in another world. One particularly evocative ritual was the floating of lanterns or small fires upon the surface at night. Villagers would place candles in leaf boats or clay bowls, lighting them before setting them adrift. Watching the tiny flames drift toward the cavern where the river disappeared must have stirred deep emotions, hope, fear, and the quiet wonder of not knowing. Did those lights continue to burn in another place? Did spirits receive them as messages? The ritual provided comfort, a way of sending prayers across the boundary that no living person could cross. Seasonal ceremonies often revolved around the river's cycles. During spring, when snowmelt swelled its flow, offerings were made to ask for safe passage and abundant harvests. In late autumn, when the current ran slower, rituals of remembrance honored the dead, echoing the belief that the river carried souls into shadowed realms. Families might gather at the banks, speaking the names of ancestors, casting wreaths of flowers into the current, or tying ribbons to trees that leaned toward the water. In this way, the river became not only a boundary, but also a thread connecting generations. Music too played a role. Simple flutes carved from bone, drums stretched with animal hide, and chants passed down through elders would accompany the ceremonies. The rhythm of the drum mirrored the river's flow, while voices rose and fell like waves. In some traditions, the music was not meant for human ears alone. It was played for the river itself, a language of sound to appease the unseen beings believed to dwell below the surface. Offerings of food were especially symbolic. Loaves of bread, fruits and cups of fermented drink were given over to the water. To us these seem like small gestures, but to communities living with scarcity, such sacrifices carried true weight. To give food away meant trusting that the river would in turn give life, through fertile fields, plentiful fish, or protection from flooding. It was a cycle of reciprocity, where humans and river entered into a silent agreement. Some rituals were more solemn. Tales speak of individuals chosen to walk into the water and vanish, figures remembered not as victims, but as mediators, those who willingly crossed into the other world to carry messages, to intercede, or to serve the river's mysterious lord. Whether these were mythologized drownings, symbolic initiations, or rare sacrificial acts, they show the seriousness with which the river was regarded. It was not merely a natural feature, it was a being with whom one negotiated. The archaeological record supports the reality of such practices. In many parts of the world, items have been discovered in riverbeds or caves where underground streams vanish. Bronze vessels, decorated jewelry, and fragments of pottery rest in places unreachable by casual accident. They suggest deliberate placement, ritual deposits meant never to be retrieved. Such evidence reminds us that belief in river spirits was not abstract philosophy, but embodied practice, marked in the material world. Even daily acts held ritual undertones. Women drawing water in clay jars might whisper prayers, asking permission before dipping their vessels. Fishermen casting nets might spit into the river as an offering of breath. Children were warned not to shout insults at the current, for the river remembered. In this way, ritual infused the ordinary, creating a constant dialogue between human life and the flowing presence that bordered it. What is striking in these traditions is the balance between fear and reverence. On one hand, the river promised danger. It swallowed goods, animals, and sometimes lives. It vanished into caverns where no human could follow. Yet, on the other hand, it nourished crops, quenched thirst, and inspired wonder. Rituals became the means of managing this tension, giving structure to the unknown. Through offerings and ceremonies, people expressed both gratitude and caution, hope and humility. These practices also reveal a deeper truth. Humans have always sought ways to interact with the unseen. Ritual is not simply about controlling nature, it is about communicating with it, acknowledging its power, and weaving it into the story of daily life. In the rituals of the vanishing river, we glimpse an ancient understanding that mystery itself is sacred. As night fell, and the last lantern drifted toward the cavern, villagers would return to their homes with a quiet sense of peace. The ritual did not resolve the mystery of where the river flowed, but it offered something perhaps even more valuable, a way of living alongside uncertainty. The river was still unknown, but it was no longer alien. Through ritual, it became a companion, a force both feared and loved, and yet rituals were not the only response to the river's mystery. Stories too grew like vines around its banks, tales of those who vanished, of treasures hidden, of kingdoms waiting below. If offerings were a way of speaking to the river, then stories were a way of listening to what the river seemed to say in return. In our next section, we follow those stories, exploring the myths of lost travelers and the echoes they left in local memory. Where a river disappears into the earth, stories gather like mist over water. It is no surprise that countless legends speak of those who followed the current into its hidden passage and were never seen again. Some were said to be wanderers or merchants, others warriors, or even entire processions of pilgrims. Their disappearances became part of local memory, woven into tales told beside firelight, half warning, half wonder. These legends, though shaped by imagination, reflect the human need to explain what cannot be known, what lies beyond the point where water vanishes. One of the oldest stories recalls a hunter who pursued a wounded deer to the river's edge. In his desperation, he leapt into the current, believing he might retrieve his prize before it was swept underground. Neither hunter nor deer ever returned. Days later, the villagers claimed to hear faint echoes of his hunting horn emerging from the cavern where the river vanished, as though he were still calling from another realm. The tale warned listeners against greed, but it also suggested a haunting possibility that those who entered the water might continue to exist, unseen, in another place. Another legend tells of a caravan of traders who attempted to ferry goods across the river during a flood. The current tore their rafts apart, dragging men, animals, and wares into the whirlpool at the river's mouth. Weeks later, fishermen downstream claimed to find fragments of unfamiliar cloth and coins of foreign mint washed ashore. This gave rise to the belief that the lost caravan had been transported to another world entirely, their treasures scattered as messages to the living. Some said the merchants, now bartered in the lands of the dead, their trade eternal, their bargains never-ending. Perhaps the most enduring tale is that of a bride who vanished on her wedding day. The story shifts depending on the teller, but its core remains: a young woman in ceremonial dress approached the river, either fleeing from an unwanted union or seeking blessing from the water. She stepped too close and was carried into the subterranean current. Generations later, villagers claimed to see her figure, pale, veiled, drifting upon moonlit nights, walking along the banks. For some, she became a spirit of warning, protecting young women from misfortune. For others, she was a sorrowful queen, reigning beneath the river, forever bound to its hidden kingdom. Travelers' legends are often accompanied by signs, voices carried on mist, phantom lights glimmering where none should be, or strange objects surfacing from the depths. These fragments fuel the sense that the boundary between worlds is porous at the river's vanishing point. One story tells of a shepherd who discovered a finely worked bronze mirror along the shore, a type unknown in his region. The mirror was said to have belonged to a lost princess, swept into the water centuries earlier. Possessing it, the shepherd's fortunes rose, but his nights were restless. Each evening, he dreamt of dark halls and flowing water echoing endlessly around him. Not all legends end in sorrow. Some speak of chosen travelers who found not death but wonder. One tale tells of a child who fell into the current only to emerge years later, unchanged, claiming to have lived in a radiant city beneath the earth. His descriptions were fantastical: glowing gardens, watered by rivers of light, music carried by the flow of water itself, and dwellers who spoke in whispers like rushing streams. He said he had been cared for by beings both kind and strange, who finally returned him to his people with a warning: do not follow, for only the invited may return. Whether true or invention, such stories softened fear with a sense of possibility that the other side of the river might hold beauty, not only loss. Many of these legends served as cautionary tales. Parents told children of reckless swimmers dragged away, of arrogant warriors who mocked the river and were silenced by its depths. These stories discouraged danger while also framing the river as a moral teacher. To be careless near its banks was to risk not only one's life but one's very soul. Through legend, the river enforced its own laws, reminding all who listened that mystery deserves respect. The persistence of these stories reveals something deeper. Whenever a traveler vanished into the current, the community faced grief without closure. Legends gave shape to that grief, offering answers where none could be proven. To imagine the missing as residents of another world was less painful than to accept them as lost forever. The river thus became a bridge for storytelling, connecting absence with possibility. And the stories did not remain confined to one place. Traders carried them across regions, scholars wrote them down in chronicles, and poets transformed them into verses. The idea of a vanishing river became a symbol, repeated in different lands with different names. In one country, it was said to lead to a kingdom of gold, in another to halls of judgment, where souls awaited their fate. The specific travelers might change, but the theme was the same. The river was both path and test, a crossing into realms unseen. Over time, the legends acquired ritual significance. On certain nights of the year, villagers would light lanterns and place them upon the river, believing that the lost travelers guided the flames. Children were told that if they listened closely, they might hear footsteps or voices carried with the current. In this way, the legends were not only remembered, they were reenacted, renewed and woven into the community's living fabric. What binds these stories together is contrast. The river is both destroyer and deliverer, thief of life and giver of wonder. The lost travelers are mourned as victims and revered as envoys. The mystery lies in the impossibility of knowing which is true. Did they perish in the cold dark beneath the earth, or did they indeed step into another world? That unanswerable question is the thread that makes the stories endure. As the voices of the past drift through legend, we find ourselves drawn closer to the cultural heartbeat of the people who told them. Each story reflects not only fear of death, but also hope for something beyond it. Legends transform uncertainty into narrative, and narrative into memory. The lost travelers remind us that every disappearance leaves a trace, not only in the river's current, but in the imagination of those left behind, and yet legends alone do not tell the whole story. Alongside them, strange physical traces appear, unexplained artifacts, inscriptions and ruins discovered near the river's path. These hints suggest that myth and material history may intertwine. In the next section, we move from the realm of storytelling to that of evidence, exploring the archaeological puzzles that lend weight or raise more questions to the river's enduring mystery. When legends speak too insistently, scholars often begin to look for traces in the earth. The vanishing river has not escaped such attention. Over centuries, explorers, antiquarians, and archaeologists have studied its winding course, searching for signs that stories of lost travelers and hidden realms might leave behind. What they found is not simple confirmation, nor complete denial, but something far more elusive, fragments of human activity that seem to echo the legends without ever explaining them fully. Scattered along the riverbanks, for instance, are clusters of worked stones that resemble the remains of ancient altars. Some lie half buried in silt, others toppled by floods. Their weathered surfaces bear faint carvings, spirals, waves, and figures that seem to stand between human and animal. Were these offerings to the river, placed by people who believed it could carry gifts into another world, or were they markers, warnings to keep travelers away from dangerous crossings? Each interpretation opens a different door. Further downstream, near a place where the current once cut a deeper channel, archaeologists discovered fragments of pottery mixed with bones of animals not native to the region. The vessels were unusually delicate, decorated with geometric motifs, unlike local designs. Some scholars argued these objects washed in from trade routes, carried by floods. Others suggested they belonged to the lost caravans spoken of in legend, a tantalizing possibility that blurred the line between myth and material evidence. The most debated discovery came from a cave system close to where the river vanishes underground. In its damp chambers, researchers found faint pictographs painted in ochre. They show lines of figures approaching a body of water, and beneath it, a spiral leading downward. At the spiral's end, the images dissolve into indistinct shapes, as if the artist could not, or would not, depict what lay beyond. Were these simple ritual markings, or a visual map of belief, a guide to the hidden world the river was said to enter? The silence of the cave offers no answer, only mystery preserved in stone. Occasionally, objects surface from the river itself, a bronze clasp, a small figurine, even coins from distant lands, all discovered in deposits along the banks. The figurine particularly stirred fascination, a small figure with arms extended, its face worn smooth, yet unmistakably human. Some said it represented a guardian spirit, others, a traveler caught in the eternal current. Scientific analysis dated it centuries earlier than the first written records of the river's legends, raising the question, did myth grow from artifact, or did artifact confirm myth? Not all puzzles were material. Inscriptions carved on stone slabs, near abandoned settlements, mention the crossing place and the hidden stream. Though incomplete, these phrases hint that ancient communities saw the river not only as a physical boundary, but as a metaphysical one. Archaeologists puzzle over whether these inscriptions were symbolic, or whether they pointed to rituals of burial, sacrifice, or passage. For those who believed the river touched another world, the act of casting an object, or even a body, into its depths may have been a deliberate offering to unseen realms. Equally curious are the ruins of small shrines aligned precisely with the river's underground entrance. Their entrances face the current, as though designed to watch or guard the vanishing point. Excavations revealed ash layers and fragments of burnt wood, signs that fires once burned continuously within. The shrines may have functioned as stations of vigil, places where watchers kept flames alive as symbols of light against the dark path below. That act of tending flame resonates with legends of lantern rituals carried out by villagers in later centuries, suggesting an unbroken chain of practice across time. The puzzles grow more complex when considering the river's shifts, geological surveys reveal that its course has changed dramatically over millennia. What is now a quiet meadow may once have been a floodplain. What is now a dry ridge may once have channeled water. This shifting landscape makes archaeology both frustrating and alluring. Artifacts found far from the current banks may once have been deposited directly into its waters. Thus, each discovery is like a voice heard faintly across distance, recognizable but incomplete. Some artifacts challenge easy explanation. A polished stone disc, pierced at its center, was recovered from riverbed sediments. To some, it resembled a tool. To others, a ritual object. Local stories immediately connected it to the legend of the lost bride, claiming it was her mirror returned by the current centuries later. Archaeologists remain cautious, but cannot fully dismiss the uncanny way artifacts seem to mirror local lore. What fascinates most is the interplay of absence and presence. For every fragment recovered, countless others remain beyond reach, carried deeper underground where humans cannot follow. The river guards its secrets, allowing only selected hints to resurface. This creates a rhythm of revelation and concealment, enough to sustain curiosity, never enough to resolve it. The tension between scientific method and mythic resonance is especially clear here. Scholars catalogue measurements, dates, and contexts, while local storytellers weave connections that science cannot prove, and yet, the two realms seem to circle one another. Archaeological evidence may not confirm legends of travelers entering another world, but it does not entirely deny them, either. The artifacts and ruins reveal that ancient people treated this river with unusual reverence, as though they too believed it marked a boundary between the known and the unknown. Even the natural setting contributes to the puzzle. The caves where the river disappears echo with hollow sounds, and sudden gusts of wind seem to emerge from nowhere. Early explorers reported hearing what they described as distant voices when standing near the entrance. Modern science may attribute such phenomena to acoustics and air currents, but the impression remains uncanny, especially when considered alongside artifacts that hint at ritual or passage. Taken together, these archaeological puzzles create a picture both fragmented and profound. The river is not only a natural wonder, but a cultural one, layered with centuries of human engagement. Each altar, inscription, and object points toward a deep-seated belief that the river connected this world to another. Whether that other world was understood as the land of ancestors, the realm of gods, or a metaphor for death itself, we cannot fully know. What we can say is that the physical evidence affirms the river's central role in shaping identity, belief, and imagination. And just as archaeologists sift soil for artifacts, listeners and storytellers sift memory for meaning. Both uncover fragments, and both face the same challenge: the story is always incomplete. This incompleteness is not a flaw, but a feature. It keeps the river alive in thought, just as its waters remain alive in flow. From the physical puzzles of archaeology, our journey now turns toward the realms that exist beyond science, the spiritual interpretations. For if stones and artifacts suggest reverence, it is the spiritual traditions that explain why. In the next section, we follow the current into beliefs of afterlife and transcendence, discovering how the river became more than water, how it became a path of the soul. When myths are spoken, and when archaeology uncovers fragments, there remains a deeper layer that neither fully explains the realm of spirit. For those who lived beside the vanishing river, its mysterious course was not merely a curiosity of the earth, but a doorway of the soul. The waters were seen as thresholds, flowing between here and elsewhere, carrying not only boats and offerings, but also prayers, hopes, and the essence of life itself. To understand this river is to understand how human beings have long imagined their journeys beyond death, into realms unseen. Among local traditions, the river was often described as a bridge, just as its waters slipped beneath stone and disappeared from sight. So too it was believed did the soul slip beneath the veil of the world at the time of death. Crossing the river, whether by boat in myth or by current in ritual, became a metaphor for crossing into eternity. Some compared it to a dark tunnel, lit faintly by torches. Others described it as a calm passage, where water itself bore the soul. gentle as sleep. The disappearance of the river was thus not an end, but a transformation, a model for what awaited every living being. This spiritual symbolism resonates with other cultures across history. In Greek tradition, souls were ferried across the river Styx by Charon, whose boat echoed the hidden channels of our own river's myths. In Norse sagas, rivers marked boundaries between living lands and the underworld of hell. In Vedic hymns, waters were praised as mothers, bearers of both life and transition. Such parallels suggest that rivers universally stir an instinctive association with passage and rebirth. Yet, in the case of this vanishing river, the belief was sharper, for here the physical world seemed to enact what the spirit imagined, a waterway that vanished into the earth, as though visibly traveling into another realm. For villagers who lived along its course, rituals reflected this interpretation. Oral accounts recall funeral practices, where water played a central role. Bodies were not placed in the river itself. Floods and currents made that too dangerous, but symbolic offerings were carried downstream. Candles floating on leaves, bread wrapped in cloth, or clay figures, molded in the likeness of the deceased. These were said to prepare the path, guiding the soul along the same hidden journey the river followed. Watching those offerings vanish into darkness gave mourners a sense that their loved ones had not simply ended, but traveled onward, born into mystery. Another spiritual layer emerged in seasonal festivals. Each year, as spring floods swelled the river, communities gathered to cast flowers and colored threads into the water. These were gestures of gratitude and renewal, acknowledging that the same current which carried souls away also nourished fields, sustained animals, and refreshed human life. The dual role of the river, life-giver and soul-bearer, was not seen as contradictory. Rather, it mirrored the cycle of existence itself, life flowing into death, death flowing into new life. Mystics and seers too sought visions along the river. Folklore speaks of hermits who meditated at its vanishing point, listening to the hollow echoes from below. They reported dreams of radiant landscapes, music carried on currents, and voices of ancestors calling through water. Such visions passed into local lore, shaping a belief that the river did not simply end in darkness, but opened into light, an entrance not to oblivion, but to continuation. In this way, the river became both feared and beloved, a reminder of mortality, but also a promise that death was not final. Even natural phenomena fed into spiritual interpretation. Strange mists that rose at dawn were said to be the breath of spirits emerging from the underworld. Sudden gusts of wind at the cave entrance were believed to be the sighs of souls passing through. The deep resonance of water striking rock beneath the earth was interpreted as the murmur of unseen voices, a choir of the departed. While science might explain these as acoustics or condensation, to those who listened in reverence, they were evidence of a deeper truth. The world of spirit and the world of matter touched one another most clearly at the river. Religious syncretism also left its mark. As new faiths spread into the region, older beliefs blended with newer doctrines. Christian missionaries, for instance, likened the river's hidden flow to the passage through death into eternal life, reframing an ancient myth into familiar teachings. Similarly, in Islamic traditions that later touched the area, parallels were drawn with the Sirat Bridge and the rivers of paradise. Rather than erasing older traditions, these influences layered fresh meanings onto the existing symbol of the vanishing river, ensuring its relevance across centuries and communities. Some spiritual interpretations grew more esoteric. Secret societies or brotherhoods, mentioned faintly in medieval manuscripts, were said to use the river in initiatory rites. Candidates, blindfolded, were led to its banks at night and instructed to listen to its flow. Only when they could describe what they heard beyond the water were they welcomed into deeper teachings. These rites reflected a belief that the river was not merely external, but internal, a metaphor for the hidden passage of consciousness itself. Just as the river disappeared into unseen channels, so did the human spirit plunge into hidden depths of wisdom. The river thus became not only a path for the dead, but also a teacher for the living. Its flow whispered lessons of surrender, reminding all who gazed upon it that control is an illusion, and that life, like water, moves on whether one is ready or not. Its vanishing reminded listeners of the limits of knowledge, inviting humility before mysteries too vast to solve, and its re-emergence miles away carried a quiet assurance: what disappears is not necessarily lost, what vanishes may yet return, transformed. For modern seekers, these spiritual interpretations still hold power. Pilgrims come to sit near the vanishing point, offering prayers or meditating in silence. They speak of feeling lighter, calmer, as though the water absorbs burdens and carries them away. Some describe vivid dreams after visiting, dreams of flowing rivers and luminous horizons. Whether psychological or mystical, these experiences show that the river continues to serve as a channel of meaning, just as it did for those who first wove myths around its course. Taken together, the spiritual interpretations reveal a pattern. The river is not simply a feature of geography, but a map of the soul. It shows how humans, confronted with mortality and mystery, shape nature into a guide, a comfort, and a promise. Whether one believes in literal other worlds or in symbolic journeys of consciousness, the river's vanishing remains a potent image. It reminds us of the boundary we all must cross, and of the hope that beyond it lies not emptiness, but continuation. From this deep well of spirituality, we now turn toward a broader horizon. For while myths and rituals reveal the river's power to shape inner worlds, one question remains: why do such legends matter at all? Why do rivers, myths, and mysteries continue to captivate us across centuries? In the next section, we step back to reflect on the cultural significance of legends themselves, how they endure, how they guide, and how they continue to flow through us, like the river that inspired them. Legends are more than stories told around firesides, or whispered in the quiet of evening. They are threads that bind a people to their land, their ancestors, and their sense of identity. The tale of the river that flows into another world may seem, at first, to be only a local curiosity, a small myth, tied to a single landscape. Yet, when we pause and listen, we realize that such stories carry far greater weight. They are cultural mirrors, reflecting the fears, hopes, and values of the people who keep them alive. In every society, legends function as bridges between the visible and the invisible. They explain what cannot be fully understood, and they give shape to what cannot be seen. For the communities along this mysterious river, the legend transformed the landscape into something sacred, a living symbol. To them, the river was not merely water carving through stone. It was a teaching, a presence, a reminder of the mysteries that dwell at the edges of human understanding. In this way, the legend ensured that the land was never viewed as empty or meaningless. Every bend of the river carried story, every echo in the cave held significance. Culturally, such legends also served to preserve continuity. When a grandmother told her grandchildren that the river carried souls into another world, she was not only entertaining them, she was passing on the worldview of her ancestors, weaving their voices into the present. The story became a vessel of memory, one that ensured the values of reverence, humility, and curiosity endured across generations. In times of uncertainty, whether famine, flood, or political upheaval, these legends anchored identity, reminding people that they were part of something larger than themselves. The legend of the river also reflects a universal human need, the desire to see meaning in mystery. A river that simply disappears underground might inspire scientific curiosity, but left at that, it feels incomplete. By shaping the phenomenon into a tale of passage into another world, communities gave it resonance and depth. The legend provided not just an explanation but comfort, framing the unknown not as something to be feared, but as a place of transformation. This is why cultural legends endure. They are not bound by physical fact, but by emotional truth, the truths that speak to the heart more than to the mind. Such stories also act as maps of morality and behavior. Within the river's tale are quiet lessons. Life is fleeting, death is not an end, and humility before the unknown is wise. Children raised hearing these legends grew into adults who carried a sense of reverence for water, for mystery, for life itself. In this sense, the legend was more than entertainment. It was education, subtle, poetic, but deeply effective. Cultural significance lies in these undercurrents. Legends teach, not by command, but by image, memory, and awe. We can see similar patterns across the world. Consider how the Nile was once seen as a divine river, its annual flood, a gift from gods, or how the Ganges is still revered as a goddess, her waters purifying both body and spirit. The legend of the vanishing river may not have carried the same global influence, yet within its own region, it fulfilled the same role. It made the natural world inseparable from the cultural world, ensuring that landscape and identity could never be torn apart. To lose the river, or to dismiss its mystery, would have been to lose part of the community's soul. Another layer of cultural significance lies in the way legends evolve. As centuries passed, the story of the river was retold, reshaped, and reimagined. Each generation added details, emphasized certain meanings, or blended the legend with new spiritual teachings. This adaptability is what keeps a legend alive. It is never frozen, but always flowing, like the river itself, carrying the essence of old truths while finding new forms to remain relevant. Culturally, this means legends are both anchors and sails, grounding identity while also guiding it into the future. Legends also hold the power of uniting communities. Storytelling gatherings by the river were social events, moments when individuals became part of a collective memory. To share in the story was to belong. Even today, when locals or visitors recount the tale, they join a chain of voices stretching back through time. In this sense, the legend is not just about the river, it is about the people themselves, their bonds and their resilience. Yet legends also remind us of fragility. Just as rivers can dry, so too can stories fade if they are no longer told. The cultural significance of the vanishing river lies partly in its endurance. Against centuries of change, wars, migrations, modernization, the legend has survived. That endurance reveals its deep utility. It is a vessel of meaning, too vital to be forgotten. The survival of the story ensures that even if the physical landscape were altered, the symbolic landscape would remain intact. Finally, legends serve as cultural offerings to the wider world. When travelers, scholars, or filmmakers encounter the story of the vanishing river, they carry it beyond its homeland. It becomes part of a global dialogue of myths, enriching the shared human heritage of mystery and imagination. In this way, a single river in a single corner of the earth contributes to humanity's collective story. Its legend reminds us that no culture is too small, no story too local to touch universal themes of life, death, and what lies beyond. The cultural significance of the legend, then, is vast. It is a teacher of values, a preserver of memory, a unifier of community, and a vessel of mystery. It demonstrates that human beings, wherever they dwell, refuse to see the world as mere stone and water. We paint meaning upon the landscape, and in doing so, the landscape shapes us in return. And so, as we approach the final stretch of our journey, we carry with us not just the facts of the river's vanishing, nor just the myths of its otherworldly flow. We carry the understanding that such legends matter because they connect us to our past, to one another, and to the great mystery of existence itself. In the final section, we will reflect on this connection and what it means for us today, as we consider the lasting legacy of the river said to flow into another world. As our journey along the mysterious river draws to a close, we find ourselves standing at the edge of something that cannot be easily defined. What began as a tale of water slipping into the earth has become a meditation on history, myth, and the very nature of human imagination. The river is not simply a physical phenomenon. It is a mirror reflecting back to us our deepest fears, our quiet hopes, and our eternal curiosity about what lies beyond the known world. Throughout our exploration, we have followed two currents, one of fact and one of mystery. The factual current showed us the geological realities, the maps drawn by explorers, the explanations offered by modern science. The mysterious current carried us through folklore, poetry, and the cultural weight of belief. Each current has shaped the river's identity, and together they remind us that truth is often layered. What we know with certainty, and what we sense with wonder, are not rivals, but companions, flowing side by side, like two streams that eventually merge. In listening to the legend of a river that vanishes into another world, we have touched a timeless human longing, the need to believe that there is something more, that the borders of our existence are not fixed. The legend whispers that the end is not the end, but a passage. For those who first told this story, death was not a closing door but a crossing over, a journey carried by the current into unseen realms. In this way, the river offered comfort, suggesting that life continues beyond the visible horizon. But the river is more than metaphor. Its very vanishing into darkness evokes the limits of our understanding. Even with all our tools of science, even with satellites and sensors, the Earth still holds secrets. There remain places where maps blur, where knowledge dissolves into mystery. The vanishing river reminds us of this humility. It teaches us that wonder is not erased by explanation. Even when we understand the mechanics of an underground cavern, the story of souls traveling beyond remains. Both truths coexist, the measurable and the immeasurable, the stone and the story. As we reflect, it becomes clear why such legends endure. They endure because they answer needs that science cannot touch: the need for meaning, the need for connection, the need to feel part of something infinite. In a world often filled with noise and certainty, the quiet mystery of the river offers a rare gift, a reminder that not everything must be solved to matter. Some things are meant to be lived with, pondered and treasured as mysteries that nourish the imagination. In this way, the river teaches us not only about the past, but about ourselves. We too are rivers, flowing from one stage of life to another, vanishing into the unknown of tomorrow. Like the river, we leave behind traces, memories, stories, legacies that continue on after us. And perhaps, just as the river disappears into hidden caverns, we too will flow into a realm beyond sight, carrying our essence into another world. This reflection brings us to a broader truth. Every culture, every age has its rivers of mystery. Some are waters, some are mountains, some are stars. The form matters less than the function. These mysteries remind us that the universe is larger than our comprehension. They keep us humble, yet also hopeful. They invite us to dream even as we measure, and to imagine even as we analyze. Standing now in the quiet of night, let us return to the image with which we began, a river flowing steadily, then slipping into shadow. We do not see where it goes, but we know it continues. That is the essence of both the legend and of life itself. The story of the vanishing river is in the end a story about continuity, of water, of memory, of spirit. It assures us that even when we reach the edge of what we know, something carries us onward, so we close not with an answer, but with an invitation. The invitation is to hold on to wonder, to honor the legends of those who came before while also seeking our own mysteries, to recognize that rivers flow not only across landscapes but through our imaginations, shaping how we see the world and how we understand our place within it. The river said to flow into another world may remain partly a riddle, but perhaps that is its greatest gift. For as long as it flows in story, it will continue to carry us to the past, to the unseen, to the realm where fact and faith, history and mystery walk together. And so as you drift toward rest, let the image linger, a river fading into darkness, not ending but transforming, its waters flowing softly into another world. May it remind you that there is beauty in what we do not yet know, and comfort in believing that every ending is also a beginning.